Welcome to Reverb Roundtable, a weekly show that brings the brightest creative minds and digital producers in sports, entertainment, politics, news, and more to share their stories and strategies that will help you become a better leader and creator. Today, we are joined by Eric Brown, the co-founder of Whiteboard, and David Martin from Heed PR to talk about a project that all three of our agencies collaborated on and are wildly proud of, Kim White for Mayor. In September of 2020, Kim White announced that she was running for mayor of Chattanooga and threw her hat into the ring of 15 plus other candidates. In March 2021, she and Tim Kelly went into a runoff election, and in April of 2021, the runoff election was held and Tim Kelly became mayor of Chattanooga. Though Kim White did not win, our teams were so proud of the work that we did on her campaign. From the sheer amount of videos made to the fact that we helped her raise more money than any other mayoral campaign in Chattanooga's history. On this episode, we dive into what it was like to have three agencies collaborate on such a large scale and what we all learned from this experience. Now onto this week's episode. Here's your host, Clark Campbell.
Thank you, Tessa. I'm so excited to be interviewing some people that I became really, really close to in the last 12 months. What's up, Eric? What's up, David?
What's up, gentlemen? How are we doing today?
We're doing very well. Good morning.
Good morning. Got the coffee going.
And okay, we're here to talk about the Kim White campaign, a Chattanooga mayoral race that had some extreme highs. We're so proud, by the way, before we get into this. Raise your hand if you're proud of working on this campaign. Peer pressure. We all for, if you're not watching on YouTube, we are all for. So proud of the work that we did. But we wanted to talk to two of the minds, the brains, the hearts behind the campaign. And I'm going to let Eric Brown jump in first. How about we do that, Will? Let's let Eric Brown, the creative wizard from Whiteboard.
So Eric needs to kick us off first because I'm pretty sure he was the first one that got suckered into this campaign. Thus, he brought us all in after he originally got in. So Eric, start us off on why you actually got involved with this campaign.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost, so I co-founded Whiteboard, and our primary responsibility is we help leaders leverage the internet to advance their vision for a brighter future. And I think for us, one of the things that we're always trying to do is sort of weigh a vision and sort of mirror that into a brand, right? And I think one of the biggest differences between, a logo that we might see for a company or an institution juxtaposed to a political campaign, it's a unique sort of balance because your brand is embodied in a person. It's embodied in a candidate. And this candidate was just an incredible human being named Kim White, who's invested over a decade leading the River City Company, who's just had a huge impact on downtown Chattanooga and the growth of downtown Chattanooga. And I think for anyone who is brave enough to sort of enter the public square, especially in our cultural moment, you have to listen to. And at the same time, Kim was humble in all the right ways. She listened in all the right ways. And at the very beginning, she was sort of kind of playing the role of a general manager of what is my team going to look like. So at the very beginning, there was the approach of, we want to invite multiple agencies to sort of contribute in their sort of core disciplines in and around the making of Kim White for mayor. And a part of that, David and his wife, Natalie, who lead Heed PR, were invited to the table alongside Clark and William and Tessa, and everyone at Reverb was also invited to that table to lean in to a candidate who had a really compelling vision for Chattanooga, Tennessee, and lean into one another to say, how can we leverage each other's gifts to sort of bring this campaign to life in a way that Chattanooga's never seen before, and perhaps could be a model for other cities around the country to follow.
You're an inspiration. Every time I listen to you talk.
You never know which way Eric's going to go when he talks. He either gets super serious or super fun, and I love that he was super serious.
He was super serious. I'm like about to take notes. Literally, I got out notes to take notes on the podcast that we're hosting. Eric, okay, so by the way, whenever we started this conversation, I remember where I was driving, where I was headed to. We were asked to come into this launch event because that's our core discipline, as Eric said. We were asked to come to the launch event to document it before we were asked to do 7,000 pieces of video content. I'm going to say that over and over and over again because we're called Reverb and we say things over and over again. So Eric called me on the phone and he was like, Clark, she's the real deal. He was like, I interviewed her for 7 months to decide if we were going to work with her. Okay, it wasn't 7 months, but I put down all of my concerns. I didn't have fears of politics, but concerns of politics. And I was like, if Eric Brown has put her and the team through the Eric Brown lens, like the thoughtful, creative, just mad respect for the brain you got going on up there, Eric Brown. Mad respect, bro.
I appreciate that.
I was like, okay, I don't need to do any investigation. I'm just going to get on the train. And William, before David, we know you're here, David, and we think you're brilliant as well. And we're going to talk to you in just a second. But Will, what was your first thought, Will, whenever you heard political campaign Chattanooga?
Well, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but before we hopped in on the actual launch event, we helped her out with it. We helped her and Eric out with an initial launch video that kind of announced her campaign. We worked on that before the event, and then we actually got on at the event. This was the first ever political thing that we'd ever gotten into, besides helping out a small person or two in a tiny town outside of Chattanooga. Yeah, but this is the first ever actual political campaign we got in, which was fun. We definitely had a few conversations on the get-go about if we actually wanted to dive into a political campaign, and there was a lot of hesitancy around that. And I think even as we got further into the campaign, I think all four of us and many more, I'm sure, have had plenty of conversations around the struggle and difficulty around political campaigns. And especially local politics is in a lot of ways super fun because you'll actually find yourself in divisive situations and conversations with friends that you've known forever, and they're gung-ho about one side or the other. Everyone has heavy opinions. I think there was even one person on the campaign race that their house was divided. I'm talking spouses on different sides of the campaign, which was super fun. So there's a lot of tension in that, but with it also brought some fun rivalries. I think it was a really clean campaign, which was super cool to see, and something I got nervous in. Both sides did a really good job, I'd say, of being respectful at the end of the day and not pulling too many cheap shots in one direction or the other. I think before we dive super deep into some specifics about it, though, we should probably zoom out and do a kind of macro. So there's multiple agencies sitting at the table. And one of the things that Kim decided early on is that she wanted to have multiple agencies involved in her campaign. So we should probably do an overview of what people were in which seats in this kind of, on this game board.
David.
Starting with David. So David, give us kind of the overview on your position, what happened. We'll talk about Eric and his position, where we sat, and how that all, of course, intersected with Kim's team as well, because she had full-time staff as well.
Yep.
Right. Thanks. So I've known Kim for quite a while. She always liked to invest in people who are kind of charting their own course and kind of paying their own way. And I think that has to do with the fact that that's exactly what she did, right? When she moved back to Chattanooga, she didn't have a job, and she had to figure out which way was up and who did what and how the entire city operated, so she could, make her own way here. And so I think she's always invested in people like me and like my wife. At EPR, we work with small to medium-sized growing businesses, and we have a policy. We have a no politics policy in place here that, of course, in this instance, we ripped up and kind of threw over the shoulder. And the reason we did that was, because of Kim, because of our history with her, and the fact that we truly believed in her and she'd invested in us. And when somebody invests in you, it's hard not to pay it back, when it's time. And she asked if we would be interested in overseeing the social media aspect of the campaign. Knowing that, at HEED, we don't lead with being social media folks, but for a lot of our clients, we end up doing that. And she needed somebody who was going to be able to take the policy initiatives, the overall mission of the campaign and all that, and represent it on social media, and also be able to navigate some of the problematic scenarios that can emerge very quickly on social media. And I think she liked the fact that she knew us, she could trust us, and that we had a judicious eye for social media through a public relations lens.
So PR, social, writing, managing channels. Eric, you were doing brand thematic stuff, big inspirational. You were talking to strategists and consultants, right? Give us a elevator pitch on what you were doing as it relates to the brand. What was going on in your mind as you created and maintained this Titanic in Chattanooga?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost, stepping back on a macro level, is we sort of all have to embrace that we were all at the height of a global pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of, and in a moment where everyone, me included, was all feeling politically exhausted. November 2020 was on the horizon.
Yep.
The news headlines every single day were hijacked based on this sort of polarizing moment that I think we're still learning and sort of treading our way through at the moment.
And a really big race in North Georgia, which was saturating our market.
Yep. So you just had a lot of things happen. From a local campaign, Chattanooga is very hands-on, but all of a sudden you have to go Zoom first or virtual first, and a lot of your interviews and your political in terms of your political strategy, how are we going to meet people? Through Zoom, not at their house. And those are all scenarios that every campaign, I think there were 15 candidates at the height of the campaign, which is a lot, sort of all competing for attention so that they can platform their ideas around their vision for the city of Chattanooga. And who's ultimately going to cut through the noise. Kim also has came in a time where, you've had over a century of male mayors for, and so sort of the thing that we wanted to lean into as a piece of the narrative, not the entire narrative, was that Kim would become the first female mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so our job at the end of the day was really listening to the heartbeat of Kim for our city. So you just had this Kim White 4, and obviously 4 became a mantra, in a world where a lot of organizations and people are known for what they're against. Kim sort of leaned into that posture of what are we going to be known for? Salute to Jeff Henderson, who I know is mutual friends with y'all, in terms of sort of painting that opportunity.
Absolutely.
And so the 4 word became the epicenter for her policy, for the advertising, for creative, for words. And it gave us sort of the flexibility that we could respond in the moment, but at the same time too, really anchor a lot of the core tenets of the campaign to that message. And that translated to, for stronger business, for diversity and inclusion, for, you name, for education, for better education, all sorts of things sort of fit within the policy framework under that message. And I think, for us, even though in the end, the campaign lost, is I think one of the biggest things that we were proud of is we kept the campaign on the issues of how do we better our city looking forward. And in the end, you have to trust the voters to, and trust that in the end, we all win when people speak up.
Yep. I want to say this just general note about for the podcast and for the listeners or watchers, if you're watching us on YouTube. The campaign went into a runoff, right? So the first election day, Kim performed incredibly well, right in line with her competitor, the biggest competitor. There were 15 competitors, but she forced a runoff. I think it ended up within 1 point of the leader, 1 percentage point of the leader. And then after that is where the dynamic changed, honestly, a lot more than anybody expected, I think. But if I remember correctly, we helped her raise more money than Knoxville and Memphis has ever raised, maybe, or has I hate to say those numbers, but I know we raised more money in this campaign than any major city other than Nashville. Is that true? It was a huge win.
We certainly raised more than in the history of Chattanooga. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was an incredible fundraising total that Kim was able to bring in, and we still got outspent almost 2-1. But yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that was the thing. I mean, I think it was a lot of it was a testament. You can't raise money unless people believe in you, and two,
mm-hmm.
To help them write those checks, they need to be seeing evidence that your campaign is legitimate, that it has a chance to win. People don't show up to vote, and they don't write checks unless they believe that what they're doing has a chance to make an impact and a win. And I think that we're the creative team, all the agencies combined, helped in the fundraising, though we didn't actually go out and ask people for money. Other people did that, mainly Kim. But everything that they were seeing out there, led them to believe that this is a campaign worth investing in. And I think that we helped pave the way for that. A lot of times, marketing helps salespeople close deals. Actually, marketing, if done well, helps business development team get meetings with prospects and get people to sign on the dotted line and encourage them. And I think that we did that in the political realm very well.
So, David, real quick, I want to peel back your mind, and you and Natalie both real quick. Peel back. You're creative. You run an agency. You write. You have your own creative ego. You have your own, this is the way we do things at Heed PR. You were basically following not only Whiteboard, but also the campaign internal, the core staff on the campaign. What was it like for you, the ebb and flow, the pull and the push, the tension that you were facing? What was it like? Were you just I'm going to do whatever Eric and team say? Or were you I'm going to take their lead and I'm going to put my own twist on it? How did you manage that? I know myself how hard it was on our side. How did you manage that?
I think that it was one of the most enjoyable collaborative experiences I've ever had in my career. I was really worried, to be quite honest with you guys. I knew Albert. I never worked with Albert at Waterhouse PR.
Waterhouse.
I knew Kim.
I like calling it Albert PR though, just to pause. Albert PR is fantastic.
I knew
I'm gonna
Kim
get a shirt that says Albert PR.
I never worked with Kim, and I didn't even. I mean, I knew you guys, but I don't think we'd ever met or anything like that. And so, coming in with so many different parties at the table, that we're all going to work together. It's okay, let's see how this goes. And it went incredibly well. I mean, I went through withdrawals, the week after the election from my nightly text thread with Eric and Clark. And, what do we got tomorrow? And it really was. I mean, obviously, Eric led the charge on creating an overarching kind of brand. And we had those really, big pieces that, commercials and videos and testimonials and stuff like that. But we also had to off the cuff within those brand standards and where we were in the moment of the campaign. We had to come up with creative ideas for tomorrow. What are we going to do tomorrow or 2 days from that? And that's where I felt very blessed to have such a great working relationship with you guys, where, we'd agree that this was something that we wanted to do, but I'm not a designer. But then the next day I'd have 3 or 4 different things hit my inbox from Eric that were created off the cuff to help us keep churning it out. I'll be honest with you, Chattanooga is a very small city and knew very well many players on the other team. And since, the second election day, I've had the opportunity to sit down and, talk with people that was our opposition a few months ago, and just very candid. What was going on? What was the lay of the land? What were you thinking when this happened? And all that. And from what I know, the other team was doing a lot of polling, and their polling was coming back favorable over and over and over again.
Yep.
But I think that they were looking at their numbers and scrutinizing them, because they were looking at the numbers and they'd look at what they were seeing, whether it was on social media or email or whatever from Kim's camp. I mean, there's no way these numbers are right. And because we had incredible engagement with Kim's followers. It could have been a 24/7 job, especially during the runoff phase, just social media alone.
Right.
I mean, that's how much, and we went hammer down on social media during the runoff. We invested a lot in it financially, because, for people who are watching this that aren't familiar, what's up?
Pause.
You could only invest a lot financially into the ad side of social media in the runoff, right? Because we didn't have ad capacity for most of the campaign.
We could not run ads up until, we'll call it, for lack of better phrasing, the general election, when there were the 15 candidates running. In the week right after that, Facebook lifted their political ads ban that had been put in place during the 2020 election, federal election, and then the Georgia runoff. And once that changed, we saw that as an opportunity to do a little bit of equalizing. We knew we were going to still be outspent in traditional media modes, especially television, but we really thought that we could get in front of the right people and drive some impact with especially Facebook ads, Facebook and Instagram.
I have a question about that real quick, David and Eric. Either one of you can take this. How frustrating, because for the listeners, the other camp had a huge bucket of money, personal mostly maybe, huge bucket of money to spend on traditional media. And not necessarily, we didn't have the same bucket, but we couldn't get out in the ways that I think we wanted to through social, which I think was the easiest way of growing the audience early, or growing the base early. How frustrating was it to almost not be able to get on a platform? It was almost like you couldn't walk up the steps because you couldn't get out and talk to people, because the mechanisms for political campaigns spending money was just not there. So you didn't have a megaphone. How frustrating was that?
Eric, I'm gonna just very quickly say something. I think, Eric, you're gonna run with it. In the moment, like when there were 15 candidates and there was the political ad ban going into the general election, it was extremely frustrating, because you guys are just making so much incredible content. We had I'm talking better than like a U.S. Senate campaign, like creative you guys were generating, and we couldn't get it out except to our organic following.
Right.
So in the moment, very frustrating. However, once the switch was flipped after the general election, and we went into the runoff, and we had this complete arsenal of stuff, like this backlog that had been made over the course of the past few months. Then it was like, well, shoot, this is great. Now we've got so many different pieces of content that we can direct towards very specific audiences, demographically, geographically, whatever. So, in hindsight, it kind of worked out very well. Perhaps it would have been better to have been able to get Kim's brand in front of more people earlier on. That's hindsight 2020. But once that ad ban was lifted, man, it was a field day for me. Just getting y'all stuff out there. What do you think, Eric?
No, I totally agree. And, and I think at the end of the day too, like the function of social media and technology at large is to scale human effort, and for this specific campaign, you saw Kim White, our candidate, she was on a Zoom call, I think, pretty much 24/7, like would wake up on Zoom, would go to sleep, ending a Zoom call, for 6 months. And I just think like that's the uniqueness of just the entire moment. So I think the challenge for every campaign around the country, not exclusive to just Chattanooga, Tennessee, is again, political exhaustion amid the global pandemic, amid November 2020, which just dominated the headlines. For us, a lot of the creative was really pushing people to really listen and pay attention to what's happening in their own local hometown, our home, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Because we knew that if we didn't get voter turnout, of the 125,000 eligible voters, only 25,000 people cast a vote in the runoff election, which isn't great, and I think ultimately in terms of the feeling in the room, I mean, I think anybody would be frustrated at the turnout, right? Just because local politics arguably makes way more difference than a national election does. But because of, again, our moment in time, national politics certainly outweighs all of the headlines. Yeah. So I think for us, we really tried to flip that pendulum to be like local. How can you be inspired about what's happening in your local community? Please get involved here. And ultimately, we came up short. Yep.
I have a question. Sorry, Will, to take the whole show.
You're just great, man.
Fascinated. So, just looking really, really deep here, which I think is what most of our listeners would probably want. Philosophically, we are pouring all of this energy, everything we know about messaging, about brand, about video and effectiveness and social and ads and organic, and we are pouring all of this collective energy. I would say collectively, just some of the best energy. We may not be the smartest people on the planet, but our energy level was extraordinary. I know that we were pushing the ball in the same direction with competence.
Right.
But people didn't show up to vote. Pissed me off. So, philosophically, sorry, I'm channeling a little Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn here. Did I just compare myself to them? I didn't. Whoops. So what happened? Like, why didn't people show up? I don't think they would show up even if we didn't try. Like, why? Messaging should work, right? Why do you think it didn't? Why did people not show up? That's my biggest question about the whole thing. We're not idiots. People still didn't show up. Why?
I have thoughts. About this.
There,
I think a couple things. I think just general exhaustion, like the Chattanooga municipal elections are where they are for a reason. A long time ago, they were set to come on the heels of national elections, essentially ensuring lower turnout. So let's just be real. People who had the ability to write those rules back in the day did that for a reason. And if you're able to have a smaller set of voters, you can control those votes a little bit better. And it favors incumbents. And guess who writes laws? Incumbents. And so I think there's that. And I also think that there is just a general misunderstanding of the general populace out there about how municipal elections function. People's mind, and again, I was every day dealing with real people on social media, answering questions, and people could not wrap their minds around that it was a nonpartisan race, right? And so it didn't fit this kind of like zero-sum black-white political narrative that exists out there. And so people have a hard time framing their minds around that. And then also, going back to what you guys were talking about earlier, what are we for, right? And I thought that was, in terms of messaging, and for people that pay attention, we want to know who our candidates are, or what they're for, what they want to get behind, what kind of initiatives they're going to push forward, and what they're for to make our city better. However, the political narrative that exists that is far outside our own doing is the people are positioned against one another. That's what our major political parties do. We drive people to the polls by painting the other side as others, by making the other candidate a scary person, somebody who, if they get in office, they're going to undercut my well-being and my way of life and all of that. And so since neither Kim White or Tim Kelly, who's now our mayor, were willing to do that.
Right.
I think it kept a lot of people on the sidelines. People will go vote based off of fear. It's a tried and true proven political tactic. And since neither candidate was willing to do that, I honestly think that left a lot of people on the sidelines. And then there's one more thing, especially when it comes to Kim. Her most natural voter base were suburbanites. And the suburban areas of Chattanooga have historically not been very involved in local politics. When they identify with local politics, they tend to identify more at the county level. They don't see themselves represented in city politics. People living in East Brainerd and Hickson, when they think city politics, they think that's for somebody else that lives closer to town. And they have historically just left a lot on the table in terms of their own political influence by not showing up. And that was something that we ran into a problem with.
Such good info. That's helpful. I want to ask Eric the same question. And I get that. I think we worked really hard to create videos that connected with so many different neighborhoods in Chattanooga. That was the whole theme, right? But I think you're so right, David. Very interesting. Eric, what say you, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, again, the question for us was, what bottlenecks are we all facing because of this ingredient between exhaustion from November 2020, global pandemic, and trying to figure out, is in person even possible? At this point in time, it was no. And trying to get Kim's message in front, on the doorsteps and, in the news feeds, as often as we could. And at the same time, really inspire, with great creative and messaging that was optimistic and hopeful throughout the whole way. And yeah, I mean, I walked away sort of thinking like, if this is the culmination of local politics and involvement, there's a bigger challenge for cities across the United States to sort of figure out, okay, how are we going to hone in on our local messaging, local involvement, local participation? Because again, 25,000 voters juxtaposed to the 125,000 people who could vote, that's the biggest loss, in my opinion.
Let's do roundtable format real quick. Biggest thing you learned from doing one of your first, was it the first big political campaign for all of it? No, I think Eric worked on one. Was it your biggest political campaign, David? First?
Yeah, to be this deeply involved in, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So same for all of us. I know Eric worked with he can talk about that if he wants, but biggest takeaway for me was probably messaging and power, which is related to what you were talking about, David. This is kind of what I've been thinking about for a while. And I credit Tim Kelly with not going, like, jumping into this power fear conversation that you were just talking about, but messaging and the balance of power. That the narrative right now is so black and white, not in the sense of racial, but in the sense of I'm for this, I'm against this. Yeah, you and them. Because we never went into that water, the messaging was powerful, clean, simple, compelling, but it wasn't activating. That's the basic way I could probably pull that out. It was interesting. It wasn't activating because we're playing from a script nationally that the only way I'm going to get out and vote is if you push that button inside of me, the messaging button inside of me, and it's usually a fear, power driven. They're going to take control of blah, blah, blah. They're going to remove this. They're going to do that. So you already said this, but that's the biggest thing I learned from this campaign when it comes to video and messaging was that vacuum, the activation. I don't know where that goes. Okay. Who did I say next? Will?
Yeah, I can go. I mean, I remember walking away from the runoff night. Obviously, we're all kind of bummed out because it didn't go in the direction that we wanted it to go. But in talking with the team and recapping over the following days, it was great getting to realize that even though it didn't go our way, we did a really dang good job in the process going through it.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about.
And as I'm like thinking through the play out, the multiple teams all playing together, like right person, right seat is one of the things that Clark and I talk a lot about in regards to our organization. Do we have the right person in the right seat? But that was such a maximized thing in this campaign when there's multiple agencies all working in tandem to communicate effectively, communicate quickly, because good Lord, did we push stuff out quickly. And it was awesome seeing us really figure out a right person, right seat from a macro level, even in agencies as we were going in the campaign. You guys were talking about your text threads earlier and like the nightly text thread of what do we got going on tomorrow. But it really was cool seeing huddle up and then break. And then you see all these people go out in different directions. And then they all come back with just the right piece of the puzzle to fit together to then push out this next phase, whether it's, this foundational brand piece, whether it's this really, really supportive graphic ad set, whether it's this really, really intentional and strategic copy that's going out. We really found a good right person, right seat rhythm as we got into the campaign. And I think that just goes to show intentionality in who you bring to the table, and also releasing and going, this person is better in this seat. And we're actually going to be way more empowered through that. That was my takeaway. It didn't go our way, but if we had to do it again, like I'd pick the same team.
Yep. Right. Here. Eric.
Well, I think first and foremost, great work end to end doesn't always work or doesn't always win. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, but that doesn't mean you necessarily lost. I think.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Michael Weir, in his books, Reclaiming Hope, he says, "Well, I'm convinced that we should not place our hope in politics. What I also know from being from seeing our politics up close is that our nation benefits greatly from people carrying hope, real hope, one rooted in reality, and with them into the public square." And at the end of the day, I mean, that was always Kim, right? That was always sort of the embodiment of what we hoped people would see in her, that would inspire them to take time out of their busy schedules and check a box, and I think for us, I mean, and again, I think also from a team perspective, leaning to each other's strengths without skepticism or, like was one of the greatest joys of working on Kim White's campaign, right? There was never second guessing. There was always immense trust at the round table. And, and even down to all the exploration we did around the Kim White green.
That magical green,
which in a lot of ways became one of the most talked about and iconic pieces of the campaign. My favorite part, there was a woman, I think at one of the election nights, I forget if it was the runoff or election night, but the comment was made that this green is the most inclusive color we could have made. We could have made that choice, and so I think especially in this sort of day and age where everything's sort of reserved to blue or red, we just said, you know what, in a nonpartisan election, let's break some boundaries. And the green became one of the most talked about things.
So many people say, I don't really know much about either candidate, but I always see that green around Chattanooga.
Right.
It was iconic. It stuck out.
I'm pretty sure we went through 3 rounds of just greens, if I remember correctly. Until
he was sliding that hex code just a little bit every time.
So we landed on that one. So it was great.
Man.
Eric,
not to mention, how many campaigns have Eric Brown as a built-in counselor as you go throughout the process? Because that was pretty much his main role for me. He did graphic support, but we'd talk all the time, and he's just happy-go-lucky all the time, smiling, making sure everyone was good.
Well, speaking about that culture of that of Eric, what you said about the team and the non second guessing and the there was so much trust, so much good energy. I will say that even after the campaign, I haven't seen anybody pointing fingers. Like, it wasn't like if we had just had Eric Brown change that color, if he'd PR would have been better at social media. Like, nobody was saying that. Everybody left, and we met up again a couple weeks later, and everybody's like, God, you guys were so good. You guys, it just was it was weird. I expected I won't say who, someone sat me down in a local coffee shop at the beginning of the campaign, and he said, you're going to hate it at the end. Everybody's going to be mad at each other. Everybody's going to be, no matter if you win or lose, there's going to be a bunch of infighting. And I left the whole experience, and maybe we got lucky. I don't know. But I left the whole experience going, that was incredibly hard, but incredibly fulfilling.
Yep.
Even though we didn't win. Okay. David, biggest thing you learned, and then I got one more question to wrap up this conversation. Biggest thing you learned about messaging, marketing, politics. Go.
Right. Okay. So I've been thinking a lot about just my own career recently, and kind of like this campaign and what I learned in it fits in this kind of overarching just concept I've been pondering over the past few months. It's that, I may not get what I want every single time, but in the end, it all works out. And I think that this campaign fit that perfectly. I didn't get what I wanted, which was for Kim to win and be Mayor Kim White and all that. But in the end, it all worked out. And I can point to a lot of, when I say it all, it's like got great relationships with some of the most incredible agencies around. My own stock and the HEED PR stock went up, and our amount of inbounds for new business are just almost too much right now. I think that when I say it all worked out, it's people that I have known and loved who are on the other team. There were no bridges burnt, and those relationships are as strong as they were before we decided we were going to join different camps. You may not get what you want, but if you're kind, you do your best work, and you're committed to something bigger than you, it's gonna work. It's gonna work out at some point, and that's my biggest takeaway from this experience.
Yeah. After the runoff election, my 8-year-old walked downstairs because she was in bed by the time I got home that night, and when she walked downstairs the next morning, she crawled up, walked up next to our bed, and was like, "Dad, did Kim White win?" And I said, "Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no. But in a lot of other ways, she did."
Yeah.
Every political campaign, has this pillar called integrity, right? That's a choice. We have all been abused and just enamored and, almost punch in the face with negative advertising throughout our entire lives, right? Or politicians that say one thing and do another, right? It's just part of the assumption we make. And I think that's why everyone sort of gaffes and or has some heartburn when you have to engage hard political conversations. I think we walked away from the runoff election with the results in terms of no finger pointing, no regrets, because integrity was always the assumed role that the Kim White for Mayor campaign would have, and that was a day one strategy, of we're not going to go negative. We're going to keep this thing on the issues. I think Chattanooga it was a great campaign run that sort of surfaced a variety of issues throughout our city. And my hope is that we'll all be better for it and are better for it.
It's good. It's great.
Hear, hear.
Hear to that. Gosh, you guys, I just enjoy your presence and your camaraderie so much, and everybody. And just, it's important to note there were more people on this team, so many more people. Just shout out to everybody. Shout out to everybody that worked on this team. It was incredible. Especially Albert and Kelsey helped me with names.
Amy.
I was about to say, Amy should be probably at the top of the list.
Amy should be at the top of the list.
Blair and Tucker.
Absolutely. Just such good human beings to work with.
Yeah, and my wife, Natalie.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the one who works. The one who works.
The one who declined our initial request, and then we had to follow up with David. That's what we scheduled.
Exactly. The last question I have, and I'm going to ask you guys to be super disciplined here. And
I've heard that 3 times. The last question.
No, hold on. Listen, that's just what we do, communicators. Is either one word or a sentence. I don't want a bunch of thoughts. Just there's people that are listening to this point. They're probably interested in politics at some level, or messaging at a level. They watch CNN or Fox News and they love the dynamic and the conversation, or they hate it and they just watch to learn what they don't want to do. What's one piece of advice, just one word or one sentence? That's what I'm going to ask for on, hey, you're getting into this, you're doing a political campaign, or you were coaching or advising someone in politics, in messaging. What's the biggest piece of advice? They had 1 minute with you. What would you tell them? What would you tell them?
Know who you are.
Whoever wants to say, know who you are.
I think one of the biggest things that is challenging for all of us, because we're enamored with so much messaging, I can get out of my phone and scroll and I can see the latest crisis news headline next to a hilarious meme, next to a GIF that's also hilarious, next to the next, some sort of advertisement for clothing. And so it's dizzying the amount of things that are inputting into our brains and our hearts every single day. Right. Which can cause us to sort of respond in ways that are not thought through. Right. I think the greatest thing about working with Kim was she's a leader who knows who she is, which is rare in leadership these days. I feel like is leaders who know what they believe, know where their weaknesses are, know where their shortcomings, but ultimately believe in the hope of what they're chasing, and ultimately, sort of inviting people to link arms with them as we sort of create a greater good together.
It's a great piece of advice.
Especially
in the world we live in, know who you are, because it's so hard to be just 17 personalities a day. David, single biggest advice you could give someone that wants to be part of a campaign one day?
Right. I would say look for ways that you can grow aside from just growing your career, right? So if you get involved in a campaign and your team wins, well, your career is going to probably benefit from it and it's going to grow. However, if you don't win, what did you get out of it? So you want to be able to look for ways where you can refine your skill set, where you can make beneficial connections, where you just whatever, right? That you can grow. So win or lose, that you're going to come out in a better spot than you were when you got into it.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you for talking about a beautifully painful season of our lives. And I would say, honestly,
an experience I would never want to do again, but a great experience.
But a great one. I would say, honestly, if you were to take a bucket full of what all the emotions felt like, I would say 90% of it was extraordinary. 10% of it that happened in a 1 hour window, maybe a 12-hour window, was not so emotionally stimulating. But I couldn't have been happier to do it alongside you guys. So grateful. So grateful. Thank you for listening, watching to the Reverb Roundtable politics episode. Will we have another? Dun dun dun. Maybe one day. I have a gut feeling we're gonna do this maybe again. For somebody. I don't know who. Thanks for listening. Check us out on YouTube. Tessa's gonna tell you all about the stuff, the show notes, and all the good things. Let me toss it to Tessa. For now, thank you for listening. Have an amazing day.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Reverb Roundtable. We hope that you enjoyed this inside look at mayoral campaigns and agency collaboration. We know that we had so much fun doing it. Don't forget to grab the show notes for the episode by going to rvrb.cc/podcast. And we will see you next week on the Reverb Roundtable.